Hi everybody, I just wanted to go over 2 ways that you can finish the back of your embroidery hoop. The first way I'm going to go over is just by sewing a running stitch around the back of your hoop. The first thing I like to do is get some kind of fabric that I'm going to use, and I'm going to flip my embroidery over and put this fabric on the back of the embroidery, and then I'm just going to flip it back over. And I'm going to take my hoop and go ahead and put both of these sandwiched together back in the hoop. You just want to make sure before you start trimming, oh, this is way too tight. You just want to make sure before you start trimming any of the fabric that you like the way your embroidery is centered. That is like the worst thing when you start trimming and then you realize that you've like not completely centered your embroidery, because it's hard to go back from that. Because what we're gonna do next is trim about like, I would say like a 1/2 inch around the back of the hoop, so you don't have much to work with after that. So make sure that your embroidery is centered the way you want it. So now I'm just gonna cut both of these fabrics and leave about like a 1/2 inch around. All right. And I missed that. Sometimes you can do that when you got 2 layers. Okay. So now you're gonna take a needle and thread. I just use embroidery thread, and I'm just gonna tie a knot in the end of this. And I'm just going to, through both of these layers of fabric, I am going to make a running stitch just around the entire back of this fabric here. This one's a little bit complicated to do. Sometimes I can kind of just run it through a couple stitches at a time, but I'm not really able to do that on this one. So your basic running stitch is literally just you going up and down through the fabric. These don't have to look super pretty unless you really care about what the back looks like. And they don't have to be, I would say don't make them super small, because you're going to be pulling this tight, and then that will in turn pull the fabric tight to the back, and it's hard to do that with like super small stitches. All right, so I have stitched all the way around. Now you're just going to pull it tight. And then you're just going to tie the 2 tails together. And that is that. So that's the first way if you like don't have hot glue, but I prefer to use hot glue because I feel like this can kind of loosen up over time. So I'm not going to trim these tails because I'm going to show you the other way that I like to do it. Alright, so the second way that I like to do it requires a hot glue gun. I'm going to take this inner fabric and separate it from the outer fabric here. And I'm just going to trim this back piece of fabric down to the hoop, because we're just going to be securing the outer piece of fabric to the inside of this wooden ring here. So I'm just gonna cut this all the way around down to where the hoop is. Try not to cut the other piece of fabric if you have like a super sharp pair of scissors. The one tip I'll give you with this too is don't trim both of your fabrics together like I did for the first part. I just did it for demonstration's sake, but it's easier if you just have your whole piece of fabric on this side untrimmed when you're doing this part, so you're not having to fight the two layers together. It's kind of easier to hold a larger piece of fabric. All right, so I've trimmed that, and now I'm literally just going to take my hot glue gun and put some glue on the inner portion of that embroidery hoop and just fold it down, and I just go all the way around like this. And if you have little pieces that look like they're not quite secure, just go back through and fold them down on themselves. And there you go. You can just take off the extra strings of hot glue, and that's that. And if you are looking at your hoop and you're like, the ring doesn't look like it's completely centered on the design, now that you've glued it down, you can take the outer ring off and it won't affect the fabric at all. So you can take it out and put this back on if it looks like it's a little bit crooked, anything like that. But the biggest thing before you trim everything is just making sure that at least the design is centered in the hoop. So that is how I like to finish my embroideries. I hope this helps. Thank you.